Oh, okay. So let me turn this off.
Okay, so hello everyone, hello the ones who are watching the recording. Now you will have two tunes here. It's me Ville here, and then we will invite rest.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to join us on the video, I'm actually on a mobile here, and Vile is kind of taking over the admin duties since I'm kind of my other laptop was just not working. So anyway, so thanks Vile for helping out and being an admin for this crowdcast session. And welcome everybody who's here for this study group. Sure everyone's excited about going over version 2 of the Constitution. And I think Vile put the link on the chat with the latest version of or actually the version 2 Constitution from Block 1. So does anybody want to be on video, number one? Oh, hey, how's it going, Jason? Jason was very active last week, so how's it going, Jason? And Eve, he doesn't have the bandwidth right now, but that's cool. He can probably chat with us. Yeah, there's two ways. You can either join us on the video chat. We could get up to 4 people total, or you can just chat on the side on the right hand of the screen. So feel free to say hello. I'm on mobile, so I see Jason and Eve. Is anybody else on? I guess feel free to say hello.
Would Jason like to join us?
Hey, how's it going, Ryan? Hey, Tanish.
Oh,
so yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Eve, you can actually download this Crowdcast app, if you want, and I don't know, maybe for future, and it works pretty well. I'm on mobile. I'm on an app right now, so. But yeah, anybody feel free if you want to get on the video chat. Otherwise, we'll probably just start going article by article. Okay. So the Wi-Fi is a little spotty for Eve. Okay. Anybody else want to be on the video right now?
Yeah, I sent invitation to Anna, but you haven't replied.
Okay.
And how is Ryan? Would Ryan like to join us?
So hey Anna. Okay.
Join.
So I think Vile sent you an invite, Anna. Okay. Ryan doesn't need video, I guess. So. And anybody else who wants to volunteer, and then maybe in a minute or two we'll get started. So I think Anna is going to join us on video. So.
Okay. And yeah.
Oh yeah. Did you send the invite, Vile?
Oh
Anna,
yeah. But it's probably this link, the block 1 link.
Okay, so Jason also is volunteering.
Okay, so
invites too.
I will. Okay, apparently I didn't invite Anna after all. Now she should be invited.
Okay.
And then Jason. And yeah, get rid of Article 50.
We're going over version 2, Article 15. So
yeah.
So yeah, and we only could get up to 4. So Tanish, maybe we'll kind of rotate people in and out. I could probably, hop off in and out as well. So.
Okay. Hello, Jason.
So, yeah.
Hello.
How's it going? Hey, how's it going, Jason?
Good. How's everybody?
Good, good. So yeah, that's the other option. You don't have to necessarily be on video. You could do
Hello.
you can do what Jason is doing, which is just audio, and you get a little Space Invaders icon that
Yeah.
shows up. So, how's it going, Anna?
I'm good. How are you doing? Can you hear me?
Good,
Yep.
good.
Okay, good. I'm great. I'm really excited about this, so thank you.
All right, awesome. So we got
Hello.
Anna from the EOS tribe. So, all right, we got our four up on the screen, and anybody else in the future who want to kind of get on, one of us will have to drop off, and then we can rotate people in over time. But for now, I think, we're fine. And let's just get started. Does everyone have like the Block 1 website with the version 2 Constitution on it?
Just loading it up.
Okay.
Yeah, I sent the link above. That's a bit, and
Got it.
So there is a little bit of background information. So it's actually might be good to read that really quick. Should we give maybe a few minutes for people to kind of read through that entire page, or should we just dive into the first article?
or is there someone with good English who would like to read it loud?
So Article 1, then
To
we're
read
going
out.
straight to Article 1 then? Okay, so yeah, let's just go and get started at Article 1. It's pretty long, so Crowdcast is asking me to say something nice. So okay, does someone want to maybe read that? We just do this like old school like classroom where the teacher like picks out a person in the crowd and asks them to read a kind of a passage in a book or whatever. So who wants to read Article
If,
1?
if there are no volunteers, then I will do it with my Oxford English.
I'll jump in. I'll read this one.
Okay, cool.
If there is a dispute on intent of code, then intent shall be determined by a supermajority vote of elected producers or an arbiter mutually agreed to by the parties to the dispute and enacted by the producers. A supermajority may, at their discretion, freeze the contract during an active dispute until such time as code to fix the contract is available. The parties to the dispute must produce proposed replacement code. The producers may charge a reasonable fee and/or place reasonable requirements on the parties to the dispute. A supermajority is defined as 2/3 plus 1. Ricardian contractual terms that cannot be enforced by properly functioning code are beyond the scope of the producer's authority to evaluate and enforce.
So who would like to start? Because I think that what this first article does is that it creates very interesting government, which is elected by the token holders, but it's not referendum. It's asking the block producers. So it's kind of an interesting government structure there.
That's a good point. I think with the first original constitution, there was some indication of layer, and so it was about maybe one purpose of it could be to just limit kind of the arbitration powers, or just at least define it. This one now kind of is all about the block producers kind of taking up that role, as you said, Vile, and giving them kind of this governance power. One thing I'll just throw out there, I hope it doesn't sidetrack things, but to me, whether it's an arbitration layer, which I think could be very inefficient, I think just relying on block producers to do this arbitration, I guess, is just as bad. I mean, you don't want the block producers taking on this responsibility either. So I don't see how it improves it much. Maybe it's better than an arbitration layer, but it probably isn't much more in terms of inefficiencies. So anyways, I'll throw that out there.
Yeah, I think this boils into very traditional debate. What is the role of the government, and is democracy a good thing? And I think democracy is a good thing. So I could argue that people would vote out block producers who don't follow their view of the blockchain. So I think that this kind of day-to-day management jobs could be outsourced to this kind of government. But there are many people like Jun who don't see government as so strong role that I probably do. So yeah, I think this boils into the traditional question: is government a good thing, and is democracy working?
I have a completely different thing. Sorry, go ahead, Anna.
Yeah, no, go ahead. I want to hear the completely different thing. I want to hear that.
Okay, well, in the first place, this places a fair bit of burden on the block producers. And the order of listing says block producers first and agreed arbiter second. So the way I take this is that the default layer of governance is a supermajority of elected block producers. And the arbitrator role is secondary, seemingly optional. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, or I would probably say, well, I agree, but I would probably put it this way, that arbitration will be implemented by block producers.
Like a human layer arbitration would be the last resort, but it also wouldn't be covered by protections of this actual constitution. Would you say that's true or no?
Yeah, it would be up to the contract.
I find this interesting
yeah,
because,
I would say that's true.
Oh, sorry.
I was just agreeing with you. I think it's true. I think what you're saying, that it's a human layer of governance. Yeah, that's true.
The human layer, I guess, we step back for a second. We think about how EOS was launched by a bunch of humans, you know, in their own voluntary time, because it's a public launched chain. So I can see why the human layer is something that we actually had to have at that point, because there was no other way to actually relate to what was going to happen. A lot of people are not coders, and they don't know how to do their owner Cardian contract to interface with the chain and what's going on, and, you know, tools would eliminate that. But at the very beginning, we didn't have those things. So I can see why the appeal for a human layer is appealing to us as humans in general. You know, like it's kind of scary. But I can also see, like, even at the beginning of Block One coming out with like their Medium post or talking about changing the Constitution, they had mentioned that they had seen what happens when people are given the tools of arbitration, in which everything becomes a dispute and everyone becomes someone that can be disputed. And I think that that's something that we experience being very young, and that, you know, maybe as we mature, it wouldn't be at that point. But I think what was going on is it was kind of getting chaotic and scary for the liability or even a growth stunt to the chain if we had like freeze orders and all this stuff. So I can see why that this was presented, because it was kind of the original idea of what got you into EOS, for things to be automated, you know, via blockchain and smart contracts. Like, the idea is really appealing. But there's like, there's a gap of education or understanding, because it involves code and programming, and a lot of token holders are just token holders, you know. So I can appreciate both, and that's why I'm here. Is I feel like there could be a V3 and I just wanted to learn Vue 2 more. So thanks for letting me be here.
Thank you for being here. And I think also that human layer is kind of appealing, but I think that we should not try to appeal too much to old structures, because those are not applicable to blockchain. So I think that we would need to teach the crowd the blockchain world, like how things should be done. But I also agree that for example, ECAF now puts in the web page that they don't deal with stolen keys or lost private keys in the claim section, and that may raise questions to normal layman, like why I can't appeal. I can appeal to my police station, I can appeal to courthouse, I can file all kinds of papers here and there. Why I can't file complaint to ECAF on my own lost key, and then they would just say, well, it doesn't work that way, or something like that. So I think that that's unavoidable, that we have to teach the blockchain way of work. But we should also take good components from governance.
If somebody wants to sign on for me,
okay.
I'm going to get off video so someone else can have a chance. I don't know how to do that, though.
Yeah, don't worry, Anna.
Okay.
Wants to get on, we could probably do that at that point.
Okay,
But,
sorry.
You're good for now. Or if you don't want to be on the video, you can also just be if you want. But it's fine right now.
Okay.
I was let's see the comments here below. I think everyone, it's a good kind of comment about kind of the human layer and all that. Eve mentioned old structures did not have ODR. ODR is new and is the future. I think if you can explain what ODR is, I know DR is dispute resolution, but the O part, I'm what the O stand. Online, okay. Online dispute resolution. And for those that haven't, there was I think a guy named Colin. What was it? Colin Rule, I think, who has a lot of experience in Colin Rule. There's a video from the it was Amy's arbitration working group that and Colin Rule had a lot of experience with online dispute resolution at eBay and has had a lot of insights. So definitely check out that video. Hopefully someone could put a link to that video as well. But he gave a lot of great insights about just dispute resolution at eBay and all in the past. So so this is definitely something to look out for. And then if we put this on YouTube, we'll put the link, that link as well on it. So let me see. So any other comments about Article 1? I think it does really kind of go straight to the because it relies on block producers for dispute resolution. And to me, I'm those block producers. What do you think? What are your feelings about it? If I know Eve, and then also you, Anna, part of a block producing team. What would you feel if you had to take on this responsibility to arbitrate, and if people were to request paying a fee, but you know, that's it's going to determine what their fees are. But what is it? What do you think about just taking that responsibility on as block producers? Eve or Anna or anybody else who's on as a block producer?
I'll let Eve go first. He's CEO. Oh, he lost audio. Oh. Well, I would say that part of being elected and, you know, unelected by losing votes is kind of the people, you know, voicing their opinion on who they want in that position or power. So for a block producer, you know, of course they're busy. Oh, Eve wants to know the question. So how would you feel about being a BP that's responsible for arbitration is the question, if you want to take it over, Eve. I think it's part of the duty of being a block producer. And I mean, if that's what the code says that we have to do and we agree to that, then we have to play that role. What that will turn out to be, like, hopefully, like what he was saying with the online, Eve says that it's a conflict of interest in his opinion. He doesn't think that BPs should be arbitrators. That's Eve's from EOS Nation.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to go on that?
Sorry. I considered the first article to be more like BPs can facilitate and arrange a framework for arbitration. I don't see that BPs should do the arbitration themselves, but they can give authority to that arbitration. Like, okay, we will honor this agreement now.
Yeah. I guess going back to the question was, Eves agrees that BP should help the framework, and he agrees with that. It's something extra, but if that's part of the job description and you agreed to that code, then you have to play that out. But the idea is that the online dispute resolution in the code would take care of most of all the problems automatically. Anyways, because of agreements that you laid beforehand, or even updating that smart contract or the code. You know, there's some hurdles to that too, but you have that option, and it would, I feel like that the BPs coming in as an arbitrator is kind of like the last resort when it can't be resolved, and at which you also have one neck to hang that you're voting for if they don't do what you're saying for the vote. So then the voter has their voice to say, you really screwed me over, you're losing my vote, I'm going to campaign against you or whatever. That could go against the BP. And that's another headache that they would have to think about, but, you know, part of the job. I don't know, like Eves had said earlier, the thing of being the judge and the jury is, like he said, it's a hard role to play, and historically that hasn't worked. So for the code to take care of that problem for you with online resolutions and using code and stuff like that is kind of like what you're hanging on. And then let's see what Eves is saying. EOS Metals says, well, V1 as well put the responsibility to decide if or not to enforce the award by forums, so they will become the judge. And then Eves from EOS Nation says that BPs bring value in many different ways. This would be one way which BPs might be compelled to bring value. And that's something I was thinking about too, is like, but then we segment to what BPs are good at. So there might be BPs that are really good at dispute resolution, BPs that have a large team that has a background in that, in which they would be like the one that you would try to go and get to represent you or take on your dispute. And then you're going to have ones that have to do it because it's in the code and they're not good at it and they don't really want to play that role. So I think to be able to back out and say, we're not good at this and we don't want to do this, we just want to produce blocks and keep it secure and going, I think that that's a fair option for block producers. And then, you know, as a token holder, then that's your right to vote for who represents what you need in a block producer. But you have 30 to vote for, so it's not that bad, you know, out of 200 or more.
If I could share a thought or two about this. I agree with Eve, and I agree with the overall sentiment that it's definitely a conflict of interest. One of the issues of this article is that you don't go to one block producer, you need a supermajority. So block producers need to work together, and maybe this is an easy thing to fix, but I see an issue with the order of operations. If somebody were to bring a dispute to the block producers, would they just do it to one? Would they just bring their dispute to one block producer and then it would have to circulate? Or would there be a portal where people can register a dispute that block producers would track? That's one question, but I think the bigger question really is about separation of powers and about core competencies. I mean, separation of powers is a pretty important concept. And arbitration is a profession that comes with certifications. As it stands right now, as far as I'm aware, block producers have not been required to hire a certified arbitrator. It's a core competency that they don't need, and it would be a pretty serious burden on them in terms of their operating costs to need to have somebody who's got expertise in arbitration on staff for this purpose. I see a few really serious problems with Article 1. I think it places an unfair burden on block producers. I guess, to summarize, I think it places an unfair burden on block producers. It drives their costs up. And there are order of operations issues in terms of how a person would approach with a dispute. And it eliminates a separation of powers, which is part of the balance of human governance. We need to have a separation of powers somewhere in there.
Separation of powers is a good point because yeah, that's the another factor. I still see that the first question is that do people believe in government and democracy, and then yeah, you are right, powers should be separated. Checks and balances should be also.
Well, I believe in democracy when it's intelligently designed. Democracy can be the best system. One of the design elements for a democracy that works is the separation of powers.
Hey guys, I just real quick.
What? You are breaking. I can't hear. Can anyone else hear?
I can read what you're saying, but I can't hear. Ryan can hear.
Yeah.
He has excellent hearing.
Hello. but it's yeah. We can't hear you, June. Oh yeah, that's true. June is on mute. Okay, that explain. But I had with the web page on mobile with Crowdcast, I had a problem that I couldn't really mute and unmute when I wanted to. It did that randomly, and that's not really nice. Okay, so
separation of powers is a big deal right now. Before we even get past one, it's separation of powers. Like, can we solve this? Or a lot of people have too much of an issue with that before, you know? Like, so that's something we should definitely write down as an issue.
Yeah, there are some really excellent organizations that serve like the industry of arbitration. Some of them have a near global scope. Some of them are operating just on local or national levels, but this is an existing profession, and it does have I guess you could say, a standard of performance. And I don't think we should dismiss that, and I don't think we should place that burden on block producers because it's expensive.
But I think that we would have a problem to enforce separate structures because at the moment the only way I see that things can be enforced on blockchain is by block producers. So if there is a separate organization like ECAF or some other juridical branch, so to say, and they decide something, as long as block producers don't implement that, no one will. So in real life, you always have the police and army who will go to your door and let's implement
Yes.
this.
But the army doesn't vote on your guilt or innocence. That's the army is the enforcement arm. The army is not the judge who evaluates whether you're guilty or not.
Oh.
So that's why we need the arbitrators to determine innocence and guilt, and we need the block producers to be the enforcement. And that's, to me, that's enough of a burden on the block producers and enough of a motive for token holders to choose which block producers to vote for based on the way they work with the arbitrators.
But I kind of see that this is what this first article is kind of all about. I kind of see that the arbitration should be handled by the contract, and then block producers just implement that because that's their ultimate responsibility. So I kind of see that this is what the first article would be all about, or it's my interpretation.
Okay.
A gentleman asked, let's go Ryan next. I think there's an issue with enforcement with something like reg producer, assuming the community wants this contract to be enforceable. ECAF or a similar entity could be a separate house of power and that could make an unbiased interpretation of reg producer and BPs who are in violation of said contract. Otherwise, you'd have BPs evaluating and enforcing regs against themselves, which EOS Nation or EOS New York filed against themselves right after they did that. Or each other. And then another gentleman, J. Bucks Steiner. What do BPs do if ECAF goes rogue in the scenario being discussed? We wouldn't have ECAF. Is that correct?
Well, in this constitution, ECAF wouldn't have any special power. Could be, for example, if we make a Ricardian contract, we could define that ECAF would arbitrate that. But this constitution doesn't give ECAF any special powers.
Tanish of EOS Metal is talking about referendum, and they have a unique bond proposal system. If I'm saying that wrong, please correct me. To look into Tunjis. I can't say it. I'm sorry. Forgive me. We can spell it out in chat. And then, I'm sorry, I'm in the middle of this, so I can't look it up, but thank you. Thank you so much. And then Eves had mentioned that they don't need to do anything and then be accountable to their voters. And I think that's response to what do BPs do if ECAP goes rogue in the scenario being discussed. They don't do anything and then be accountable to their own voters. And then Ryan, EOS 42, what would you want that, forgive me, what would you want that to be standard would be the issue? If someone is malicious, they aren't going to fairly interpret or enforce against themselves. This is true. Like, And I think, and that's another thing with V1 is I can understand why V2, especially being a dev, like, let's let code solve it all. You know, like, forget people because you can't trust them, blah, 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 right? So you always have this issue with V1 of like, well, who are the arbitrators? Who are the ones in power? Do we trust them? How do we balance that? And then if they're malicious within V1, then they can be removed if they're acting maliciously. But if someone is in control of the code and a BP with the power, and like we had said, there's no separation of powers, and they're being malicious, then we try to outvote them. But say they're an exchange. What if they're, you know, a big exchange and they have a bunch of vote proxies and trading going on that they're not going anywhere, whether they're malicious or not, because of the stake that they have? Then how would you do that? I guess would be V2. Is that what you're kind of suggesting, Ryan? We want a standard, I guess.
Yeah, well, a lot of things will be broken if there is an exchange with a lot of voting power. So we kind of rely and hope that there will not be such an entity.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is a core element of the whole blockchain space, much bigger than EOS itself, is trustless network incentives. We know that there's a human behind every wallet, and there's a human behind every miner, and there's a human behind every full node. At the end of it all, humans run the whole network. The reason it's a trustless network is because we can trust the expected behavior of the incentive. And EOS is no different. We have much more face-to-face human involvement, but at the end of it all, the reason we can trust any human on this blockchain is because we can trust their incentives. And so block producers, if ECAF goes rogue, block producers don't have to follow the instructions of ECAF, and they never do. And so if the BPs choose, if the BPs recognize that ECAF has gone rogue, they release a statement explaining their position. They released a statement explaining why they did not enforce according to the instructions of ECAF, and that might actually earn them more votes. And similarly, when ECAF is operating as intended and they send an instruction to block producers, then the correct thing for a block producer to do to protect their own reputation is enforce as instructed. At the end of this all, I guess all I'm saying is that incentives are everything. Placing the power of interpreting the intention of code in the block producer's hands, like just basically eliminating the arbitration layer, to me, it places an unfair burden on BPs. It's outside their core competency. It raises a conflict of interest. I like the idea of having an arbitrator handle that role and give instructions to the block producers, and then let the block producers decide whether or not to enforce.
So for you, would you agree that an online dispute resolution that was in the code and that we all had voted in as the tool we're using, that would maybe open your eyes to seeing V2 as something more, since it would be automated within a third party that would actually take place of the BP? Like if there was a hybrid of this to where we could have human and code married, and we had the help from people that are already doing this in the world, with billions of dollars worldwide, would you be open to a V2 with that layer in mind, where BPs would not be the dispute resolution? It would default to a third party. What do you think?
There's a lot to that question. I'm a little bit confused by the question, to be perfectly honest. Can you try simplifying it?
Yeah. So if we say we have a V2 or a version where it's mostly code, but instead of having the BPs be the arbitrators, we have an agreed third-party online dispute resolution company that everyone has voted in as the company EOS wants to use, mainnet wants to use, and they are taking place of that burden that you have placed on BPs with V2. Would that open your mind more to, if that was taking off their shoulders, then they wouldn't be burdened with that, and they wouldn't have to spend the extra money, and they wouldn't have that much power? Wouldn't that eliminate your main concerns?
So do you mean now like based ECAF or ECAF which gets power from a referendum of token holder?
No, I mean, if the burden of dispute resolution was given to a professional company, third party, that EOS token holders voted in as the platform they want to use, and if they don't like it anymore, they can unvote that they want to use it or whatever. They have a trial run of it. And the burden of the disputes, it's always about disputes, right? The burden of the disputes is placed on the professionals that have the code and structure and platform like Uber Eats to solve disputes, specifically for EOS.
Yeah, I hear you. That,
you know what I mean?
Eve is right. That's basically what we have now. That's status quo as far as
okay. Okay. When you contact ECAF, you fill out the forum and you wait for a response. When you contact Uber Eats or eBay or Amazon dispute, and you get an instant response and you instantly get your problem solved. That's done through building out tools and learning what the common problems are and creating solutions for that. And we can't get there unless we envision ourselves to be able to be solved that way. And unless it's always going to be default of human layer, right?
That sounds like an idea that could be built by the Worker Proposal Fund. If we ever get that into existence, the Worker Proposal Fund develops. The Worker Proposal Fund develops an AI implementation similar to the eBay arbitration. They're automating it using an AI, a bit of help from AI at the very least. Is that more your question? Sort of like a filter, like put the dispute through the AI first and let that speed up the process so that we have a near finished dispute resolution process for the humans to begin on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. When you envision blockchain,
I like AI.
When you envision blockchain, don't you envision code and AI and all this stuff kind of just making things work based upon agreements that you made prior to other people? That's what I'm envisioning.
Really powerful open source AI too. I mean, the world. If there's one thing that would make me feel better about AI, it would be open source AI. And
well, you know, OpenAI.
Open source.
OpenAI. Check out OpenAI nonprofit.
Right. So I mean, maybe that would be a really powerful one. I think it'd be a good project for the Worker Proposal Fund.
We should probably go back, June, if you want to go back through chat on questions we missed or comments.
Yeah, and I also have to say to Jay Bucksteiner that apparently you can use the questions and answers feature, but I can't because I don't know how to run this thing. So sorry, you are questions and answers tool should be the way, but I can't use it. So let's use the chat here.
So you're talking about the question and answer feature, right? We answered the first question. It was, what do BPs do if ECAF goes rogue in the scenario being discussed? We had discussed this one. And then noob question from Jay Bucksteiner. It has been discussed whether we want to allow exchanges to be BPs. Exchanges aren't allowed to be market makers in traditional markets. Maybe this isn't a fair corollary. Sorry. Forgive me. Thank you. I'm going to assume you forgive me. Thanks.
Same as correlation. Sort of like the singular of correlation.
Oh, okay. Thank you. But I like traditionally this mining part is about maintaining and securing the network. So from that angle, I see that exchange it's okay for an exchange to participate to maintaining and securing.
You hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Sorry about that. It's a great conversation, so I was just following along. I had some tech issues, so um, so yeah, I think it's great. Maybe what do you where do you guys see in this conversation? We're high level. I guess the first article, the most important. So I think we should spend time figuring out kind of the scenarios we see with kind of having the block producers take the responsibility, or maybe an arbitration layer. To point out, there is possibly a third option where it's not relying layer. And that's the it's more and more seeming to me that having an arbitration layer may not be that efficient. Having the BPs take on that role also is not an efficient way to handle any kind of disputes. Best to almost not have any arbitration at all, unless it's almost it could lead to some systemic failure, like maybe a DAO hack, where you could just have a resolution amongst the people to decide how to resolve those by just referenda. And beyond any of these extreme cases, to code is law, and there's just no arbitration at all, and leave the arbitration to the DApp layer. I think that's another alternative, because it seems to me of where you have this arbitration, just having it at this layer is to me inefficient, and I don't think it may be possible, because we discussed in the previous sessions that arbitration just is not almost, it may not even be doable at the base layer. And Marcin was very an advocate of no layer. But even with this version 2 of the Constitution, there is some sort of arbitration that is done by the BPs, which doesn't solve the entire issue of inefficiency. It just shifts it over to. And so my thought is another alternative is just say there's any extreme situations that need to be resolved, referenda, just have people vote on it. It's a DAO hack, reverse it, and it's done. And then, but beyond that, I mean, these very extreme cases, we almost have no arbitration layer and just have it at the DApp level. So I just want to bring in another alternative that I'm starting to see as another viable alternative. So you have either a third party arbitration like ECAP. You could rely on like version 2, which is the BPs, or you could just say just rely on referenda as the third kind of. They just rely on that. Just don't worry about the BPs handling it, or like ECAP.
Yeah, I agree also that we could have with a new constitution have something like emergency clause, which could be based, like it could change from time to time how to act on emergencies, because I also acknowledge that referendum may take too long for really serious and time critical disasters. I think that we could just agree on emergency process with referendums, and then it could change from time to time according to the token holders.
Also, it's maybe I'll answer that first. It says, so disputes, you don't matter, deal with it yourself, or forget to opt in. Studies indicate is the norm, tough luck. So it's not like wanting to help all the people disputes included. It's just a matter of just the reality of how you resolve these practices. So theft was a big issue for me. I wish we could resolve all thefts, but then people mention, you can't really prevent all of it. And when you actually look at the practical process of trying to reverse these subjective, sometimes mostly subjective issues, really, you almost can't resolve it in time. Like the blockchain's moving so many transactions per second, and to have these little stall or delay the blockchain. No one, they're probably gonna, like, thieves are probably gonna be able to cash out into an exchange before you even can freeze it. And if you start freezing all these small kind of transactions, you just get incredible delay. So it's number one, it's almost impossible to that's according to Marcin, and I'm starting to think that it's almost too difficult to try to resolve, that in the end, you end up making your, like, one of the fastest blockchains one of the slowest blockchains because of this layer, right? And so that's big, I think, problem. If there was an easy way with automated dispute dispute resolution, maybe, but it's almost, to me, something that can be experimented on on a higher layer, and that's what I think Marcin would probably speak or advocate. But I'm not here. I don't know the details. I think he's going to come out with something. But the more details, and I still want to dig into exactly how this will work. I'm afraid it's almost impractical to resolve a lot of these without significant delays to the functioning of the blockchain.
Well, we're talking about a few things all at the same time here, right?
Let me make sure I cover. So we know human behavior because it's the basic disputes will be resolved. Jason.
Sorry, yeah. We're talking about a few things all at the same time here, right? I mean, I really would like to just stay focused on Article 1 of this Constitution and try to work through it. Article 1 of this Constitution, B2, it comes with the, it limits the scope of dispute resolution to the interpretation of a Ricardian contract. Theft isn't even mentioned. And I think the point you're getting to is that theft, if it's not a breach of contract, it's very hard to prove. It can happen. It's very hard to enforce on chain, very hard to prove digitally. But the breach of the terms of a Ricardian contract, that could be interpreted. And I happen to agree with that idea.
Okay, that's a good point.
The arbitrator should not solve theft unless it's fraud.
Yeah, so we discussed kind of the difference between the theft being outside the scope of issues. There might be more limited number of cases that have recorded contracts and there are pure contracts. So maybe it might not be as deal with those issues. So maybe I was thinking kind of the day-to-day you know, theft issues that could bog down the blockchain. But I just think, you know, also we're just starting with this blockchain. There's going to be so many different applications. How many disputes are we going to have to resolve in different specialized industries? It just becomes a, you know, it may be bureaucratic to handle this. And if we just I mean, it's an option. Maybe it's not as, like, the more about it, just having something you know, at the DApp layer isn't just, is, to me, I'm leaning towards that right now. But I get your point. If it's just recording contracts, maybe there's going to be a more limited volume. But on the other hand, there might be just many more in many different industries as we get many more on the system. And so just imagine having to resolve, whether it's a BP or an arbitrator, you know, specialized in is I think potential for inefficiencies, vast inefficiencies. So anyways,
well, yeah, and I think that if the Constitution does not empower the arbitrator to deal with theft or disputes involving theft, that simplifies the role of the arbitrator, for one thing. And I think it also incentivizes token holders to use the tools that are available to us all to protect ourselves from theft. Like the 3-day delay on staked tokens, that's a very powerful instrument of protection that token holders have available to them. I think it's totally fair to expect token holders to protect their own property from theft. Breach of contract or malfunctioning code in a Ricardian contract, that is a proper role for the arbitrator. To me, that's all that needs to be said about it.
Okay, so yeah, so there is that's one way to clarify the distinction between theft and contracts, if people accept that, I guess. And default is let's see what Eve, when trying to get your contract, do not appoint a forum. So, you know, the idea that, you know, it'll be limited by just those cases that are of other forms. So that's okay. So that's one. So maybe some of the disputes, I don't know how much will end up falling to arbitrators, or let's say ECAF. It's still also, then if you do that, it's just then you have to manage the power. The good framework, if you do have arbitration, you would have to limit the power somehow of arbitrators and maybe BPs. And if you do a version 2, you have to limit the powers of BPs. And I think that's that's the framework you should have in mind when I think, and that's what it does. So, you know, version 2 does that. So, and Katie writes, you know, theft is the biggest reason for default arbitration, in her opinion. So what would default arbitration do if not that, and cannot be handled at the DApp layer? So Katie, you know, I also agree that theft is just the biggest reason it is a huge problem. And if we can solve that it would be incredibly advantageous for blockchain. I mean, it would bring a lot of value to the blockchain. Practically speaking, it's, number one, it's not a contract law issue. So all of the things we're writing about in the based on contract law, where there's two parties that agree to this contract, and when you theft falls outside, it's actually either under common or criminal law. or some kind of civil law. But regardless, it's not under contract law. So that's the first thing. Unless based legal framework that either refers to common law or some sort of civil law, then these thefts won't, I guess, fall under kind of the jurisdiction of the ECAF or under contract law. So that's the first issue. The second issue is the practical issue to really prevent thefts, where the blockchain is moving so quickly that a thief can actually, steal kind of funds and then send it to an exchange before ECAF or any and freeze it. And if they do kind of freeze en masse just with any indication of potential theft, then you almost will kind of stall the blockchain. May be unusable, but I mean, I do think theft is a huge issue, and maybe if it can, I would be all for that to resolve theft. But it's just there's a couple law issue. We have to be broader. We have to have a broader legal framework. Number two, we have to make it efficient, because if everyone's going to claim, and there's a lot of kind of subjective stuff that particular case of theft. But I do agree it's the most important issue, though. So those two things, I'm all for it. But I'm not convinced.
That's a tough question, because like what Katie was saying, and what you'd said just now, June, is theft is a big reason why people are attracted to protecting their life, liberty, and property on this blockchain that's going to prevent theft, right? And then also, it's something that if you took responsibility for every single person that, had something stolen from them, whether it's your fault or scam email or whatever, it's still on your responsibility, because it's crypto and this is blockchain. The idea that we could solve those issues is something really idealistic, and we had hoped that would work out. And then in the middle of that, from my experience, what we learned is that we can't save everybody, and if we did, we would be constantly saving people that probably don't need to be saved, because then within that you would find people that could scam their way into situations where their friends steal their thing and then they keep both bounties or whatever. Like, there's always going to be gaming of the system. And that's another reason why I feel like they're, having as much done by the code is awesome and leaves no room for error except for bugs in the code, which you have to look for that too. Having another human layer as a fallback at the very end, I see the value in that, because of things that are important to you might not be important to everyone else. And if you keep pushing for this issue with theft or whatever, you might be able to get some kind of resolution maybe with ECAF on that. But again, at the same time, you see a Block One trying to get away from being the hero to every person that falls victim to a scam, because then we wouldn't be able to build anything. We would be too busy trying to reimburse people that were scammed. I mean, it's part of the market that we're in. You want to say something?
Yeah, and yeah, just real quick. Great comments. The other Block One actually addresses this in that on that web page where they have version 2. They address stolen keys and I think they mentioned something about their wallet, and I think Dan does have some solutions, technical solutions to make theft even more difficult with the ID system and the secure hardware wallets and things like that. So there's going to be much more advanced solutions. Yeah, exactly. So I think Tanish,
he's defending that it would cause more issues. We should definitely. June, please read what Tanish is saying, please.
Yeah, and it's actually on the. I think he's at least the last part was part of what Block One wrote on their I guess their preface to the Constitution. They have that written, so maybe we can read that out if anyone wants to do that.
Good.
Does someone want to read that? What Tanish wrote? Because I think that's what Block One
Oh,
wrote.
read it. This okay.
So.
Am I on? Okay. The solution to this problem should be technical in nature, implementing multi-sig with biometric protection of hardware wallets with time delays, which was mentioned in the article that they're working on. Each member of the community is responsible for their own security and permissions configuration. So enabling a fallback to arbitration to dispute the validity of signature after it has been irreversibly accepted by the blockchain opens up more issues than it solves. EOS.io was designed with support for Apple's secure enclave, Touch ID, Face ID, and time delays. Once deployed in wallets, stealing private keys should be virtually unheard of, and time delays should handle the rest. So this is Dan's proposed solution to theft. And I know that for the prior theft that had happened, and which we tried to spearhead the Valor Fund, and we came into a bunch of the Genesis, the Valor Fund with the Genesis Fund, and we came into a lot of hurdles on that. Lining up with ECAF to validate who the person was privately, it was way too hard to do. But we were trying to do what he had said in near that paragraph, which was it actually would do more harm to. He was saying that by freezing it actually did more harm to the perception of the chain, and that he would have rather the bot producers get together and create a fund to make those token holders whole. And so that's what we were trying to do with Valor Fund. It was way more complicated than that sentence that sounded so inspiring. And we tried to do that, but it's like a complicated issue because you're dealing with people that are scammers, and this is crypto. So, and Katie said, please state the more issues it would open up. She wants clarity, not sweeping assumptions. Tanish, that's for you, from Katie. She would like to know what the issues are that would open up by having arbitration be the second layer, the fallback layer. I can see an issue while he's writing that out of time delay. Of course, if you're a bigger company and there's more money, you say you have, hundreds of millions of value being lost or stolen, then you probably could get, I would hope if that was my money, I would get pushed along further in the lineup. But maybe that's not how the lineup works. It's first come, first serve. And within that, we have to wait for the other people to be served as we have get to figure out who assigned what forum, what arbitration they wanted, what route they want to do, if they choose this person or not. I could see that the time delay of that would be a turnoff to big companies that have a lot staked. But for smaller token holders, we have found within the people that were scammed that they are not patient, and they have lost what they had hoped for EOS because they couldn't be made whole. So it is an issue that maybe if there's levels of arbitration, they get fast-tracked faster because depending on the amount of stake you have and what kind of bond you set up, and whether it's just a lower issue of whatever it may be of theft that's not at that level, but then you have a situation where you're deciding what's more important. So what Katie also said is, sorry if I sounded rude. You didn't sound rude, Katie. I just read it in a rude manner. I'm just trying to understand the issues at hand we're working against. She goes on, yes, I've seen the issue happen with a friend. ECAF saved $2 million in funds for him, but still have not returned the funds. He feels the funds are being held hostage, and he's looking to get legal action. And I can witness that I know several other people that have taken legal action in Korea on several people, and other countries that want to take legal action because this is their property. And ECAF hasn't given them what they needed right away. And we're also a new chain, only 3 months old. So being patient is what we keep saying to people, but at some point, like, they just want their stuff back. So, like, I can see that.
Yeah, and large amounts. Yeah, large amounts like that, I definitely think they'll be happy if this is eventually resolved. And but uh, but for just in general, what it's something interesting that Colin Rule said from his past experience at eBay is that more people are interested in having their disputes resolved quickly rather than actually getting their money back. So the idea that, you know, you have to wait 6 months for something is just as bad as not having it, having, your uh, uh, so that's I don't think I don't know how practical that is, because it's so hard to gather evidence, and deal with all these particular issues. So I want to throw that in there. And so this is also a tricky situation because, you mentioned 2 million in EOS that's still yet to be resolved. It's so, like, when you look at all these cases, uh, it's so hard to determine, ownership through even so 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 it's almost like if you have and this is a special situation where we had a 3-day freeze. In future situations, we won't have the same kind of the special situation where our own staking at once, and I think it makes it far more difficult to catch. And if we're freezing accounts en masse, that's again the delay of even using the blockchain, or delay of getting funds back, is just as bad as just losing all your funds. So anyways, it's just something to think about.
To add to that real quick, I'm sorry if I cut off, but it's just real short. Like, sometimes we're thinking about this from the perspective of the technology and the blockchain, because we're in it for the long haul. Like, we've all doubled, for the most part, I'm sure everyone in the US, because it takes so much work, we've already doubled down on EOS, right? So, like, you're in it to win it, because you believe in the technology. There's other people that are just crypto traders, and they just want to buy your coin, pump it, and then, before the dump, they want to make money. And if their accounts or their funds are tied up in arbitration or a freeze or ECAF, and they miss that pump, just imagine imagine the writing of those people that are professional traders on how they'd say, this stupid blockchain centralized, they held my stuff and I missed the pump, I hate EOS, I missed all this opportunity, or whatever. We have to also think about the people that are just here for the moment, and we want to add value to that too, because we want value in general for everyone, for EOS in general. So that's something we have to think about as well, as like the types, the personas and the types of people that are coming to EOS. They're not all coming because it's the greatest open source software and it's so fast. They're just coming because they're trying to, ride or die in the next wave or something. So that's something we got to think about as well. Sorry if I cut you off.
Yeah. Oh no, yeah. I think all the perception magnifies when these issues come up, and yeah, there is even more resentment, I think, if or potential for more resentment broadly. And then also Tanish writes in terms of what problems may arise. I think the base layer forms are binding and are enforceable. We feel that that's too much power in the hands of forms, and checks and balances become difficult. I think that's really coming one as well. Protocol layer has many arbitration forms, then BPs may find it difficult to enforce the rewards. We may not want to, just because an arbitrator says so, is eventually what block producers might end up having to be a second layer anyways, if there's too many BPs. So it's just more of a, just inefficiencies of the process that's we've yeah, if we're trying to kind of have these disputes with an arbitration layer. We believe in objective claims forced by third-party arbitrators and should not have any involvement of block producers unless disputes are related to fixing code. Scalability, with many disputes arising in the community, it's difficult to have proper checks and balances, which might lead to corruption or abuse of power long term. Judges can order individuals to do things, but it should be limited to their own property. So, and Tanish, is this what coming from block one? Just to clarify, it might be that is kind of the preface to the the V2 of the Constitution. So I don't know if Tanish is. So the other thing is, we might just have about half an hour. I was wondering, do you guys want to go through the articles? Maybe we could go through them quickly to see. I think the first one's actually the most important article, so that's kind of what we've been discussing. But we could go on to the other ones maybe quickly to go over to see if there's anything that adds to this kind of issue, or maybe subtracts from this issue that we're discussing. Does that sound good?
Yeah,
Okay,
but
cool.
by now
So
we have used 1 hour and 15 minutes of our 2-hour time slot. So
okay, all right. So let's try to be more efficient here and just go through it. I think the main one was number one, and then I think everything kind of falls, is aligned with it. So let's go to number two. I'll go ahead. Block producers shall not freeze or modify contracts that are operating as intended. So, okay, are block producers. So that at least they're thinking in terms of, hey, if we're going to block producers, we're trying to limit their powers, or at least define what they can or can't do. So does anyone have any comments on this second clause or article?
well, I kind of wonder how the intended is defined, because first of all, you would have two different sources by default: the code and the Ricardian contract. And okay, there are some very simple cases where there is a bug, but what if there is, for example, a trading algorithm? Let's say that you are running a Bancor exchange. Then that exchange runs for a year without a problem. You have high liquidity and so on, and Bancor works like it should. Then some trader learns how to trick it. It's not a bug. It wouldn't be a defect. It wouldn't be an algorithmic problem. It would be just a way to trick it. Then is that the intention or not? It's
Vile, no, that's a good example. And so I think intended is very difficult. Arbitrators are usually the ones who have experience that and domain specific experience. So really, if the block producers are having to reason about what it may be difficult without knowledge in a specific area. So, but this fault arbitration, maybe it's in those cases it might not be as difficult. I do agree, and the intent is what arbitrators are supposed to resolve, and I don't know how much experience we expect block producers to have to understand the intent, but at least as a baseline, contract and the code are two things that they can at least refer to resolve those issues. They're difficult. There'll always be edge cases. And so in that, I think if you take that mindset, Jason thinks, Article 2 is fine. There's an expectation that if you just read the Ricardian and the code, you'll cover most. But there's always edge cases that if you have experience that arbitrators usually do, that may help resolve those edge cases, and they'll just come to a determination. It'll be subjective. Arbitrators aren't always going to get, our judges aren't always going to get it right. They're going to just find a middle ground if it's a difficult edge case. So this is just my thoughts. So
Yeah, and I would like to clarify to Jay Bucksteiner and Tanish, who Tanish proposed that code would be the source in my example, and Jay Bucksteiner said that that would be up in game to fix their code. But in my example, it's theoretical, yeah, I granted. But in my example, the point is that it's not a bug. It's the algorithm would work as intended. The bunker stuff would roll as it was meant to be. But someone was more clever than bunker and finds a way to game bunker protocol. So it wouldn't be a bug. It would work as expected. So yeah, that's the trick of my thought experiment.
And I think if the ruling is against Bancor in this case, Bancor would have to update the Ricardian contract to with an additional clause that considers that scenario. Vile is what my thought is. So so there's an adjustment that you can make either way. If if the arbitration rules in favor of Bancor, then it's fine. They don't have to update any of their contracts. If it's ruled against them, they probably just have to add something, is what I would assume. Their new contract. So, as intended, not have code faults that. So some as intended is it maybe includes gamification too, so that that wasn't the intent, that it would be gamified a certain way.
Yeah.
But so let's see if we could Vila, you're gonna come up with all these edge cases. We're gonna try to go through these though. So let's if anyone doesn't object, we could go to the next one. I think that one is hopefully we discussed. Contract developers are not liable for damages caused by intentional bugs in the code. All parties are responsible for auditing the code contract before use. The funny thing is, like, I went to the EOS Alliance, I guess, working group, or Constitution working group, and this was one of the articles that we did cover in Constitution, or I think it's related to that. But anyways, so so I think again, unintentional bugs is a little bit unclear sometimes. But I guess if we go back to the idea of recording contracts, then that should clarify what the intent is. But interesting, because I think code in general, open source code, and Vile, maybe out there can confirm, open source has indemnity clause in general. If you have an MIT license, they would say, hey, if you code, I'm not liable. This is open source. You can do whatever you want with it. And just liability in general is something almost like a standard in open source software. So discussed, I think, certain angles to that. What I was thinking kind of after the conversation, that this was the reasoning behind not making contract developers responsible for their code. I think the interesting thing is, so who is a developer? What does this mean? Does it mean, because we have these recording and contracts, developers are ones that are creating the code. So if they are not liable, what is the purpose of these recording and contracts? They're not liable anyways, right? So where does the liability fall? The other idea is that, the companies should take on the liability of the developers, but where's the distinction between the developers and the company? Because they're probably part of the same entity, most likely. Anyways, so Vile, maybe the first point about for open source developers and programmers in general is like, what are your thoughts on that for developers out there that are used to it? And then the second thing is, okay, so liability, and how does that fit into these recording contracts? Companies and people and developers.
Yeah. So first of all, I kind of see the point of unintentional code, or unintentional bugs and intentional bugs, because you could, if you are clever enough, you could come up with a backdoor that no one else finds in your code, and you could steal money that way. And then you could just claim that, oh, it's just a bug because it's not intended to work that way. So I kind of see the point. It's of course hard to prove in this kind of corner cases, but I see that point. And like you said, usually in open source, or well, that's the way of open source and free software, that the original developer do not have any responsibility. All responsibility is yours. And when I started with Ethereum 2016 spring, I wouldn't have had money to make like $50,000 audit, and back then $50,000 was quite cheap. So this is kind of, I think we have to decide here, do we want only professional developers here? Because after all, EOS IO smart contract code can be updated, unlike with Ethereum. So I think that this could be critical if that would be misdemeanor to not to audit your code. Of course, misdemeanor is of course criminal law, and we can't discuss that because this is contract law. But anyway, let's say let's call it a breach of contract then. So I wouldn't like that for the other starting smart contract developers. But yeah, that's there are benefits to target only professional companies. But yeah, I don't have any stance on that.
See what you're saying,
and then
is
also
like
when you mentioned.
Go ahead, June.
Oh no, sorry about that.
No, I was just echoing what he was saying, real short, that basically where's the focus? Is the focus on deep pockets that can do code audits to a standard that we should have for EOS? We should have the $15,000 code audit from OCI. You know what I'm saying? Like, we should pay that if it's going to be implemented into the code or something that they're not going to have any responsibility for, and no one's liable. That should be thought of. But also, what about the smaller developers that are trying to build something, grassroots? Like, do they get excluded from that because they can't afford the third-party audit? Or does that open a door for a BP or someone with people that do code to offer something for them to help those people? But there's a gap that would need to be filled for bridging developers that are passionate about developing but they don't have 15 grand to go get it audited. You know what I mean? Like, they have their friends and they can get a whatever, they can request a proposal or something, but if we're not letting them know that we're thinking about them too as well within our documentation, then they kind of feel like hopeless in a sense. Like, you know what I'm saying? We don't want them to feel that way.
Yeah, so that's a good point about small developers, and also the way the statement is written, also the user has to also audit the code somehow, because it says all parties, both the developers and the users. It almost tries responsibility amongst everybody, but if it's written that way, you almost don't get any further if you have the clause, right? Like, because so it's like if everyone shares the responsibility, it's almost like, okay, what does that mean? Like, it doesn't give anybody an edge. Like, everyone's liable. And or is that, am I thinking about that right? Because if you didn't have this, I mean, it would be like and then if you have this clause, it's like just states that everyone's liable. So it doesn't get anywhere where the liability shifts to one side or the other, the user or the developer. And it's an unfair burden, I guess, for small developers and just users to have to audit code, because users aren't going to do this, you know. So
yeah, I think I agree with where you're going with this, June, in that this particular article is not appropriate for the Constitution. This particular article, in my opinion, is appropriate for a given contract at the Ricardian contract layer. Because think about the U.S. Constitution. Could you imagine an amendment to the U.S. Constitution that says real estate developers are never liable for anything they build? That would not be appropriate for the Constitution at all, would it? So for this, at the constitutional level, to say that contract developers are not liable, or as in never liable, I think it's an overreach. I think it's inappropriate. That's all I have to say about it.
I can understand it. I can understand trying to distance yourself from the liability. I can understand that. I can understand trying to tell someone, this is your investment or time, or this is yours, this is your property, it's your responsibility to upkeep it and take care of it and protect it, and that's on you. And if you're going to use that thing, it's on you. I can understand trying to put it in people's minds that we're not going to be liable, nor do we expect other people to be liable for what they build on here. It's up to them to do it and for you to double check. I can understand that. What does that open the door for? Maybe it opens the door for official badges that have been audited by companies like OCI or someone involved in EOS that we vote is a good person, that would, give them a badge at a cheaper price or something, because then you just have a bunch of programs that you don't know for sure are audited, but you're not liable and they're not liable. I can understand trying to get that message across that, like, don't expect anything, this is on you. But also at the same time, what you're saying is that it's not in the right place, in your opinion.
Yep. Yeah, and the analogy that I always make is I come from the world of construction. So the analogy that I would make here is like, if a contractor could not be held liable for their work at a constitutional rule, who would get anything built? It's like that's a fundamental element of contracting and developing and building anything, is that the creator needs to take some responsibility for what they've created, accidents or no. And we get it, accidents happen, but if the developer has made a big mistake, I think it's an appropriate decision for the arbitrator to make how responsible the developer is, or how liable the developer is for the mistake that was made.
That's true about liability. And then I think E was part of the conversation. He was thinking it was also to protect Block 1. It was one of his points, that it's like they write a lot of the code. So And then it also goes back to the open source thing where I guess there's these standard protections you have for developers of open source code. So curious, like, how is it? I mean, I don't see people sue open source developers at all, right? That's probably not ever, or I don't think that's ever done in general.
Well,
Maybe
there
I
are
should say ever, but
copyright issues, for example, Oracle and things like that, but not consequences yet.
okay.
Well, the
So yeah, it's
Constitution,
just interesting. I think there was kind of
the Constitution is the one agreement that we're never going to. It's the one agreement that cannot be disputed over. Whatever's written into the Constitution, this is like the bottom rung of law. So for the Constitution to have an article
yeah.
saying that a developer can never be held liable, it's just inappropriate.
Yeah, and it's confusing also on top of that. So yeah, and I would agree that just as a general practice, if it's almost has to be absolutely necessary, I think, to have it. If there's too much confusion, probably better left out, right? These are, I mean, we should probably articles that are absolutely necessary
For all contracts
and relevant to a specific.
Like if a developer wanted to indemnify themselves from liability of their code, then that is a user agreement for that specific code. And that's a way for a developer to protect themselves from liability, but it's a case-by-case basis. The Constitution must apply to all cases.
I think this is quite important article here because this could define the whole industry, because this defines the risks of developer and companies behind smart contract code, and also audits, but mainly the companies which are providing the DApp and smart contract code of the DApp. So I think that if the final constitution will have something like this, it should be really very well thought of, because I see that this would shape the whole industry of smart contract coding, and not necessarily in a good way. So we have to keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And then Jay Bucksteiner also says not liable for damages caused by unintentional bugs, so way less aggressive than being implied in this conversation. So maybe maybe the idea is unintentional bugs. So maybe it's a kind of a softer. It's not as strong as we're implying. So that's an interesting point. Yeah,
Yep.
we prove unintentional. So that's the other big question.
That becomes a logical vortex.
For disputes arising.
That becomes a logical vortex because this Constitution is all about intention of code is law.
Yeah.
And within it, we have this concept of intention of code is law, where like, oh, I made a mistake. That's not what I intended to do. That's a logical vortex that never ends. I don't think we can afford to have that. It's just too unclear.
Yeah. I mean, it does. I like the term logical vortex, and I think I think code is not as clear as as it gets into this vague territory. Code of law is at least stronger. Maybe be able to argue some things about code as law, but intent of code would be just natural.
Well, see, this is it.
So I know Katie mentioned something about
determine intention. This Constitution to me is about how we can determine intention of code. Okay, so we can't afford to have an intention of code concept built into our process of. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, and then I think they would argue.
It's just not tight enough.
They would argue that it's been. The Ricardian contract is is, and whoever, it's an arbitrator or block producer, in the block producer in this case, would subjectively decide the intent based on, I think is what the answer would be, and at least it confines it to something tangible, and it's not as subjective as it could be. So
yeah, I don't see a lot of good in this particular article. In Article 3, I'm just rereading it, and well, you can say all parties are responsible for auditing the code, and just leave it at that. Just say all parties are responsible for auditing the code and recording contract, because what that says is that, well, it's pretty clear. All parties are responsible. It includes the developers. It includes everybody. So there's an element of self-responsibility, personal responsibility, and there's an element of liability, and that becomes, well, I don't know, maybe it's pointless because it's so obvious to say all parties are responsible, but that's all I would leave.
yeah. And then I think Anna made a good point before about maybe it's just to kind of notify people's responsibilities on both sides, or at least try to create habits so that you have like a badge of that you've audited this code, and you can at least get some favor from arbitrators who decide on an audit on either side. So I guess as something to as just more of a notification or kind of some clause to create a what people's responsibilities are, you know, could help in some ways, I guess. But again, it's, to me, it should be, I don't know, I just think it could be limited to not have people maybe have any issues that are interpreted in many ways, or whatever it is. I mean, if it serves as a to create better habits, we could just have some kind of, again, like a code of conduct, code of ethics, and just have that part of that, or you just list out, you know, values and a code of what you want to promote a certain culture of, you know, responsibility and things like that, and even a code of ethics for theft and things like that. But I don't know if it necessarily has to be an article in a constitution. Anyway, any other comments, I guess? Let me see. So we got maybe another 10, 15 minutes, 10 minutes. I don't know.
Okay.
15 maybe.
Yeah.
So
1:42 is now elapsed. So less than 20 minutes.
okay. Hey, later, Bucksteiner. Okay, so Anna wants to go to the next one. Okay, so all service providers who produce to facilitate the construction and signing of transactions on behalf of others shall present and contract terms of this Constitution and other referenced contracts.
Basically,
Okay.
I don't have anything against that one. No, it seems pretty straightforward.
yeah, of course.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, I would say that the problem is to agree on the Constitution, because we last week we were discussing about that I loved the original concept of having the constitution hash on every transaction. It's not there. It's not in the final protocol. But there was this counter argument that just following the Tapos proofs, you will end up to the constitution. So you kind of you kind of sign it anyway. So it's yeah, but I think that the key question is that how you agree on this constitution.
Yeah, this is just simple full disclosure. If you're going to have people that are participating in the EOS ecosystem from any angle, you need to present the constitution so they know what they're signing up for. It's very straightforward disclosure.
Okay, and I think that it makes sense. Service providers. So I think one thing that we can add in general is some list of definitions. I think legal contracts. I'm not as familiar, but I know some also have definitions of terms and so
they almost always do.
Yeah, so I think that's just in general. Like so we can so that's so other than that, I think it makes sense that it makes sense in general.
This is just a rule saying that you can't form any second layer contract without agreeing to this first layer contract. And in order to form a second layer contract, you need to present this first layer contract.
Yeah, that's true. And it also clarifies the hierarchy of norms that we have been talking about in each of these calls.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All high-level contracts makes sense.
It's like the
Which constitution that is
yeah, which one?
Oh, go ahead, Anna.
Well, I was gonna say it's like the user agreement for Facebook, but way simpler. Like you have to agree to this constitution and the recording contract, or you don't get to play.
Yeah, it is a burden, I think, in general, but
maybe Article 4 should reference itself as version 2. So every time there's a constitutional update, this particular one will update to reference itself and say, you must present this version of the Constitution.
Yeah, that's going to be something when people are building a bunch of tools and they create, they add the Constitution, and then if they have to change a version or if a new version comes out and they have to go back and change. I mean, I don't even want to get into like what happens with, I guess they would be under the interim Constitution for people that have built already if it did change and they don't agree, but they're already on EOS and they already have a user base. I guess they would fall under what they were agreeing to at the moment in which they signed up as an account holder or built on the chain. I don't know. That's probably another discussion.
Yeah, that's another discussion about, just the what is it? I don't know what the term is, but the times that all these contracts are valid and at what point in time these are enforced and when they change, where what version people are going to have to arbitrate and things like that. So, and John C says, what if the server provider won't facilitate the Constitution? Is another maybe issue that John has. So we'll keep that as an open question because I'm not sure. When you say don't facilitate the Constitution, I'm trying to figure out what that means. Does it mean that it's contradictory to the Constitution? Those who tools to facilitate the construction and signing of, or are you just meaning that it doesn't
Like, what are the like
because they
repercussions
say produce
if
tools.
you don't do it? Like what if are you saying? Is my okay? Are you saying that what if the wallet? Yeah, like Tanisha said, like wallet or tool or DApp doesn't present that information to you? Like, is that what you're asking? What would happen to them since they're not following the contract, or
that would be kind of a sneaky way to create a contract without any power, invalid contract.
it would be invalid. They don't get placed in wallets. Yeah. You cut them off. Okay. It's true.
So is it just like what are the maybe
I do.
or yeah, what are the what's the punishment or enforcement or of not complying? Is that maybe also the point, John? That if you don't add this, like what's going to happen to you? Question too. I mean, just in general, like if this is a a constitution, and there's non-compliance for whatever reason, what are the penalties or enforcement? What are the enforcement measures or penalties? I don't know. Maybe that's a question too, broadly. But let's move on.
Well,
just
okay. So I think
time.
those questions can be answered as simple as this article places this document at the base layer of interpretation for all other contracts, and it's not negotiable. And if somebody else wants to make a contract that is not compatible with this constitution, then it's not enforceable, and it's just not part of the deal. I think Article 4 is just fine. The one thing maybe it reference itself to say this version of the Constitution must be presented.
Yeah, so we could go down a rabbit hole of this as well, because I think just because the other thing I would also argue that kind of in our last or one of our first episodes, the Constitution is actually a contract. It's actually at the same layer as a DApp level contract, and so it's almost like it's that's why when we call it a constitution, there's this hierarchy, but contracts are just I would say at the same level. So a DApp level contract can, in its own environment and space, be just as important as the Constitution. So
yes, and that's why this article is important. That's why this article is important, because this article places this document as the foundation. And you're right.
Okay,
when you think of contracts in cyberspace, when you think of Ricardian contracts, how would somebody objectively determine which of the two takes precedence if two contracts don't agree with each other? Well, this one has a clause in it saying that it is the foundation. It references itself as the foundation, and it's important.
So okay, but then so it'll be interesting. I think what was it? Go. Oh, we got 8 minutes. Okay. Okay, so let's table this conversation just about again the hierarchy of contracts, like and just contracts in general, like what takes precedent. But let's go on to the next one. What's the who wants to read the next one?
Yeah, and by the way, I like John's comment goes. And by the way, John, are you gem? Because that sounds like a really gemish.
Oops. So if someone can read that, that'd be great.
I can read it. No party shall have fiduciary responsibility to support the value of the EOS token. The parties do not authorize anyone to hold assets, borrow, speak, nor contract on behalf of the EOS token holders or the blockchain collectively. This blockchain shall have no owners, managers, or fiduciaries.
So this one is actually the I think we it's just funny. It was we went over in a past EOS Alliance call, and and this is also in version 1 as an FYI. The only difference is I think the version or also had some 10% rule where it said more than 10% of EOS tokens. Look up a little bit about the 10% that's not written in this particular one, but there's some fiduciary kind of, there's some finance laws use some percentage, whether it's 10 or 25%, as an indicator of like beneficial ownership of a company or entity, and once you pass that threshold, that you have some duty or in addition to just being an owner. So anyways, that's just the reasoning. I think the original one had 10%. But overall, this wants to remove any kind of fiduciary responsibility from anybody in the ecosystem. So, and then I think we discussed this, right, Jason? Yep. And was it the last we did this? So we had a discussion on this. I think, yeah. So it was our previous call. Yeah. It was in what we covered. So, and then your point was, I think, if I remember, can you maybe repeat what you mentioned kind of last week about this? If you remember.
Yeah. I do remember. What I mentioned about this is that, well, yes, this is a way to indemnify token holders against the actions of other token holders. As in, just because I have some EOS, I'm not responsible for what other people or what the blockchain does collectively. Yeah, it means nobody can be sued just for having EOS type tokens. Let's say something malicious happened to happen on the EOS blockchain, like, I don't know, I don't want to come up with any examples, but let's just say that a government was suing the EOS blockchain for maybe something similar to WikiLeaks. Maybe WikiLeaks version 2.0 pops up, and there's some government out there that doesn't like WikiLeaks part 2, so they're trying to sue EOS token holders. This clause says that the block producers must not enforce that. But I found this article interesting because the rest of the Constitution is all about private property rights, government, you know, like property, responsibility. And then there's this one saying, by the way, no one actually owns anything and no one's responsible for anything. So we kind of just want to have our cake and eat it too.
Yeah, that's true. And no, thanks for clarifying. So, you know, I guess it is removing any liability as we as token holders from being sued, essentially. Right?
Well, for the collective, it distances responsibility from the individual away from the collective, so that one token holder is never responsible for anything else that happens on chain. You know, because, well,
yeah, okay.
I think that's a fairly reasonable thing.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, so if because you know people can argue that we're voting for kind of these block producers, and something happens to the blockchain because they are, but that still doesn't give anybody this kind of fiduciary on this chain, regardless of what happens. So yeah, it is really just protecting people in general. And then the other thing is block producer. I would think I think I'm probably mentioned this, is probably might be identified as fiduciary respects, but I don't know. But that's one kind of issue that could be brought up, but because there is some power there. But other than that, there's no one else, I think, that would seem to have any fiduciary responsibilities.
Okay.
Right. It's a horizontal governance structure.
Indeed.
So we got
last
like
minute, and it's almost half of the last minute. So we have to wrap.
Okay, so we want to read 6, 7, 8, and 9, and then like I'm just kidding. So how do we want to we could go through the last.
Oh, June disappeared. What?
That I just.
Okay.
Yeah. Can you? Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yeah. 4 or 5 seconds. Yeah.
Oops.
Yeah. but